Hello fellow cyborgs and welcome to another Brontë binge video. In this video I will be comparing and contrasting Villette and Jane Eyre. You really need to read both of them before you watch this video, but just before you leave, the thesis of this video, this is not a spoiler, is just that there are some one-to-one character correspondences between the two books and some scene correspondences, similarities between the books. So that's what this video is going to be about, but if you have not read Villette or Jane Eyre, I will spoil everything, and I really think that you deserve to experience the plot points of those books while you're reading it rather than through my review. So I really hope that you do not listen. And if you're not thinking about reading Villette because of my last review on Villette, I don't think you really should skip it. It's just kind of hard to read, but please don't watch this video. Even if you love Jane Eyre and you want to hear my thoughts on Jane, don't watch it. Just don't watch it. So when I was reading Villette for the first time, I realized that there were some character similarities between Jane Eyre and Villette. That we've got Jane and Lucy. We have Dr. John and St. John. We have Rochester and Monsieur Paul. We have the nun / Justine Marie and Bertha Mason. We also have Polly and Rosamond Oliver. So I have compiled quotes on these characters, and I wanted to kind of talk you through the similarities I noticed between these two characters. And there were also two very iconic scenes that were present in Jane Eyre that I kind of found analogues for in Villette. Now, I don't know what the point of this video is. I'm not trying to say that Villette is just a more depressing version of Jane Eyre, or that Charlotte Brontë only knows how to write one kind of story and certain kinds of characters. That's not what I'm trying to suggest. I don't know what I'm trying to suggest. I just kind of wanted to share my thoughts because that is what I first noticed the most when I was reading Villette and couldn't deeply analyze it because it was just overwhelming. So that's what this video is. I hope you enjoy. So let's start with Villette and the character of Lucy. I have notes on my phone, so I will be looking down and reading them occasionally. So Lucy considers there being two worlds, the world of thought and the world of reality, and as long as her world of thought, her world of fantasy and dreaming is still alive and well, she is content to have kind of a humdrum life. She describes herself as turning crusty when she gets impatient with people and has been known to resort to violence during moments of severe impatience. At one point during a Catholic religious after-dinner lecture, she is not Catholic and does not particularly like the Catholics. She gets so annoyed that she stabs her embroidery scissors into a table hard enough to, I believe, break off the point of them. But she stabs her scissors into a table. And there's also another scene where she puts a pin in the side of her dress so that when one of her friends at the school tries to slump her body weight onto her, she'll get poked with a pin and no longer do that. Lucy also has the tendency to devote herself entirely to one person. This is first in reference to her employer, Miss Marchmont, but I think we could see how she does this for Dr. John and Monsieur Paul as well. She also has a lack of ambition and will tend to shrink sloth-like back into her shell rather than go forth. I'm thinking this has more to do from anxiety rather than not wanting to better herself, but she can be very passive and really not think about the future or her future, and if she feels like she's been rejected, then she will be passive to the point of not speaking up for herself and potentially being more wounded by the potential rejection rather than speaking up and asking what's going on. She's also not comfortable with brightly colored clothes. There's a reference at one point to her preference to a purple-gray dress that reminds her of Dun Mist. There's also an infamous scene where she has a pink dress and is kind of bullied over it and does not feel comfortable in it. She's also not fond of over-sentimentality. There's a couple instances where there's like a romantic, sort of dreamlike or very detailed depiction of a scene, and then she'll cut herself off and give a snarky comment and just not let herself have those romantic thoughts. She also prefers her love interests to be violent or angry rather than overtly compassionate or intimate. There is a specific quote, "I loved him in his wrath with a passion beyond what I had yet felt." She also will resort to violence against herself to get her love interest, Monsieur Paul, back into a frame of mind and mood that she wants him to be in. She cuts her own finger to get him to change the subject of a conversation. She also knows how to use her emotions or her tears to get Monsieur Paul to be in the mood she wants him to be in. She is concerned about her physical appearance and her plainness, but really only for the sake of Monsieur Paul. She claims to be content with friendship rather than marriage. She is occasionally afraid of and will avoid Monsieur Paul when he's trying to see her. She also really enjoys teasing Monsieur Paul. She likes the hustle and bustle of a city. After she faints in the streets, she is rescued by Dr. John, taken to his family home for recovery. She also realizes she has an affinity for acting, but then decides that she's never going to do it again because it's not a ladylike thing to do and the temptation would be too great. Her ultimate profession, life goal, is running a boarding school. Okay, so let's switch to Jane and see if we hear some similarities. Jane does not really like being in company because she's rarely noticed. She cannot bear the thought of being solitary and hated. She must be loved by others. And in fact, the greatest happiness to her is being loved by someone and having her presence give them comfort. She is realistic about her future and the fact that she will probably be serving others for the rest of her life. The utmost of the future that Jane hopes is to run a school out of a home that she rents by herself. Jane really wants to know what it's like to live in a city in the hustle and bustle. When Jane first met Mr. Rochester, she felt no fear or shyness around him because he was not handsome, heroic looking, or young. But sometimes she's kind of afraid to see him and even tries to avoid his company, like in the garden right before the proposal scene. She also delights in soothing and vexing him by turns and has a natural instinct to know not to go too far. She did not often look at Mr. Rochester because she's afraid that her looks would not please him. During her engagement with Rochester, she tells him that she is hard and flinty, and during this time she prefers his grimaces, pinches, and tugs on the ear to any form of affection from him. When Rochester chooses pink and purple dress fabrics for Jane, she tells the tailor she would rather have black and pearl gray. Jane also knows how to use her tears, emotions, and actions to quiet his more wild nature. So there definitely are quite a few similarities between Jane and Lucy, especially in how they treat and want to be treated by their lovers. Now, I don't believe that they are exactly the same person, definitely not, but those similarities were certainly interesting to me. Let's move on to the love interests. Let's start with Monsieur Paul. He is very honorable and trustworthy, especially with women. He has strong passions, vivid attachments, and aversions. He has fitful moods and an inquisitive restlessness. He also hates not being trusted. I have a quote regarding his physical appearance: "Clearness of amity in his blue eye and a glow of good feeling on his dark complexion, which passed perfectly in the place of beauty. One really did not care to observe that his nose, so far from small, was of no particular shape, his cheek thin, his brow marked and square, his mouth no rosebud. One accepted him as he was and felt his presence the reverse of damping or insignificant. He has a keen eye, power of his forehead, pale, broad, and full, the mobility of his most flexible mouth, and he is 40 years old. He is really quick to get testy, especially when Lucy doesn't do something that he wants her to do, and he'll often say some kind of nasty things or give her some nasty looks, but then he's very, very quick to be repentant. He gets quickly and intensely upset over small, trivial things, but when something really matters, he is quick to forgive and show mercy, like the time Lucy breaks his glasses. After hostility and arguments, he is very willing to forget and forgive. He makes a big fuss when he sits next to Lucy a little bit too close to her and she scooches over to get away from him. He believes that there is a natural affinity between him and Lucy, that they even have similar bone structures and tone of voice, that they were born under the same star. He is concerned that Lucy will forget him after a long absence. He was wronged in early adulthood, prevented from marrying his love Justine Marie, and yet remains loyal to her and refuses to marry. He acts as a benefactor to a priest and relatives of Justine Marie. He describes himself as a very poor, fettered, burdened, and cumbered man. He has business in the West Indies, which may or may not get him a bride. Lucy has an extremely severe reaction to the idea of being separated from him. I have another quote from Lucy's perspective. It says, "Once unknown and unloved, I held him harsh and strange. The low stature, the wiry make, the angles, the darkness, the manner displeased me. Now penetrated with his influence and living by his affection, having his worth by intellect and his goodness by heart, I preferred him before all humanity." Let's look at Rochester, shall we? Rochester was wronged in early adulthood, tricked into marrying a woman for her money so his father didn't have to split up their family estate. He is the benefactor of Adele, the supposed illegitimate child of his former mistress. I've got some physical descriptors for you. Middle height, considerable breadth of chest, dark face with stern features and heavy brow, eyes and gathered eyebrows looked ireful and thwarted, past youth but not reached middle age, 35 years old, broad and jetty eyebrows, square forehead, decisive nose, more remarkable for character than beauty, full nostrils denoting choler, grim mouth, chin, and jaw, squareness in body, athletic, neither tall nor graceful. Granite-hewn features, great dark eyes, very fine eyes, colorless olive face, square massive brow, broad and jetty eyebrows, again, deep eyes, strong features, firm, grim mouth, all energy, decision, and will. Not beautiful according to rule, but they were more than beautiful to me, says Jane. He is described as changeable and abrupt. Jane says he was proud, sardonic, and harsh to inferiority of every description, and his great kindness to her was balanced by unjust severity to many others. He was moody. He believes in natural sympathies. He feels he would bleed inwardly if Jane were to leave him. He also asks Jane if he will be remembered by her when she leaves. His harshness and sarcasm once startled Jane, but afterwards she thinks they make him interesting. He tells Jane to sit down beside him, and she feels it would be unwise to say no, so she does. So both our leading men are described as older, 35, 40. They're not super tall. They're both dark. They're both changeable and moody, and they are not very handsome by normal standards, but their ladies think they're the most handsome men of all. Let's move on to the other love interest, shall we? Dr. John is super pretty. Here's how he's described. Fine, generous gentleman, handsome as a vision, honorable hand and gallant heart, the finest company in the world, the best face, the finest figure, well-proportioned figure, his face and fine brow are most handsome and manly, his features were not delicate, not slight like those of a woman, nor were they cold, frivolous, and feeble. He was not made of common clay, not put together out of vulgar materials. His firm marble chin and his straight Greek features. Dr. John's also not very quick to understand or take into account other people's feelings without directly being told about them, and Lucy does everything to agree with his moods and his decisions. She says, "At the price of my very life, I would not have moved to give him trouble, thwart his will, or make demands on his attention. He was as good to me as the well is to the parched wayfarer, as the sun to the shivering jailbird. I remember him heroic at this moment I will hold him to be. He's rather a man of action than of thought, and to satisfy himself will not suffice. Society must approve. The world must admire what he did, or counted his measures false and futile. He's also in love with an infantilized woman." Let's move on to St. John. He's also in love with an infantilized woman. He is 28 or 30, tall, slender. His face riveted the eye like a Greek face, very pure in outline, straight classic nose, Athenian mouth and chin, large blue eyes, high forehead, colorless as ivory. Hard and cold, he only lived to aspire after what was good and great. He would never rest nor approve of others resting around him. He's most happy after performing an act of duty and having made an exertion, even to his health's detriment. He has influence over Jane big time. Serious moods and occupations were acceptable, but no frivolity, and she felt like she was under a freezing spell. He uses his eyes to discover things about other people and to reveal nothing about himself, and his looks and manner is calculated more to embarrass than to encourage. He pitilessly forgets the feelings and claims of little people when pursuing his own large views, and his life goal is to be a missionary, not just a curate in a small village. He's got to go do big things in India. So both these gents are described as having Greek-like features. They're super hot. They also don't particularly think about other people's feelings first. They have certain holds over the main protagonists in these both stories, and they're both ambitious. So Let's talk briefly about the kind of supernatural sort of elements in both of the books. So in Jane Eyre, Bertha is not supernatural, but she is described as goblin-like and is seen kind of haunting the halls of Thornfield Hall. She is Mr. Rochester's wife, which prevents Jane from marrying Rochester. In Villette, we have the legend and the figure of a nun, which appears to Lucy and Monsieur Paul a couple times. This nun ends up physically being a man in disguise, up to shenanigans with a gal at the pensionnat. However, there is an actual literal nun, Justine Marie, Monsieur Paul's lover in youth, who he was not allowed to marry. She became a nun before she died young, and he has since sworn never to marry to remain loyal to her, thereby preventing him from marrying Lucy. There are also two scenes in Jane Eyre, the scene in the Red Room and the scene with the portraits that she does of herself and Blanche Ingram, that I feel have analogues in Villette. So in Jane Eyre, I'm not going to read you the Red Room because there's not like one really good passage, but if you remember, Jane Eyre gets thrown into the Red Room, which is terrifying. It's the place where her uncle died and she feels like his ghost is going to come back to haunt her. She gets terrified and faints. In Villette, Monsieur Paul shoves Lucy into a creepy attic and locks her in so she can learn her lines for a play that she's going to have to perform in like 4 hours. Here's the passage. The attic was no pleasant place. I believe he did not know how unpleasant it was, or he never would have locked me in with so little ceremony. In this summer weather it was hot as Africa, as in winter it was always cold as Greenland. Boxes and lumber filled it, old dresses draped its unstained walls, cobwebs its unswept ceiling. Well was it known to be tenanted by rats, by black beetles, and by cockroaches. Nay, rumor affirmed that the ghostly nun of the garden had once been seen here. A partial darkness obscured one end, across which, for deeper mystery, an old russet curtain was drawn, by way of screen to a somber band of winter cloaks, pendant each from its pin, like a malefactor from his gibbet. From among these cloaks and behind the curtain the nun was said to issue. I did not believe this, nor was I troubled by apprehension thereof. But I saw a very dark and large rat with a long tail come gliding out from that squalid alcove, and moreover my eye fell on many a black beetle dotting the floor. These objects discomposed me more, perhaps, than it would be wise to say. So Lucy's more concerned about like the grossness, but there is the ghost of the nun that's supposed to live in this attic, so here's the portrait scene in Jane Eyre. Listen then, Jane Eyre, to your sentence, Jane's talking to herself. The morrow, place the glass before you and draw in chalk your own picture faithfully, without softening one defect. Omit no harsh line, smooth away no displeasing irregularity, write under it, portrait of a governess, disconnected, poor, and plain. Afterwards, take a piece of smooth ivory. You have one prepared in your drawing box. Take your palette and mix your freshest, finest, clearest tints. Choose your most delicate camel hair pencils. Delineate carefully the loveliest face you can imagine. Paint it in your softest shades and sweetest hues, according to the description given by Mrs. Fairfax of Blanche Ingram. Remember the raven ringlets, the oriental eye. What, you revert to Mr. Rochester as a model? Order! No snivel, no sentiment, no regret. I will endure only sense and resolution. Recall the august yet harmonious lineaments, the Grecian neck and bust. Let the round and dazzling arm be visible, and the delicate hand. Omit neither diamond ring nor gold bracelet. Portray faithfully the attire, aerial lace and glistening satin, graceful scarf, and golden rose. Call it Blanche, an accomplished lady of rank. Here is a similar scene in Villette. The dressing room was very near, and we stepped in. Putting her arm through mine, one of her friends, she drew me to the mirror. Without resistance, remonstrance, or remark, I stood and let her self-love have its feast and triumph, curious to see how much it could swallow, whether it was possible it could feed to its satiety, whether any whisper of consideration for others could penetrate her heart and moderate its vainglorious exultation. Not at all. She turned me and herself round. She viewed us both on all sides. She smiled, she waved her curls, she retouched her sash, she spread her dress, and finally, letting go my arm and curtsying with mock respect, she said, I would not be you for a kingdom. Ginevra then goes on to say, in the first place, I am a daughter of a gentleman of family, and though my father is not rich, I have expectations from an uncle. Then I am just 18, the finest age possible. I have had a continental education, and though I can't spell, I have abundant accomplishments. I am pretty, you can't deny that. I may have as many admirers as I choose. This very night I have been breaking the hearts of 2 gentlemen, and it is the dying look that I had from one of them just now which puts me in such spirits. I do so like to watch them turn red and pale, and scowl and dart fiery glances at each other, and languishing ones at me. There is me, happy me. Now for you, poor soul. I suppose you are nobody's daughter, since you took care of little children when you first came to Villette. You have no relations. You can't call yourself young at 23. You have no attractive accomplishments, no beauty. As to admirers, you hardly know what they are. You can't even talk on the subject. You sit dumb when the other teachers quote their conquests. I believe you never were in love and never will be. You don't know the feeling, and so much the better, for though you might have your own heart broken, no living heart will you ever break. Isn't it all true? So there you go. Those were the things that I noticed that were similar. One-on-one correlates between Jane Eyre and Villette. I hope you enjoyed this video. I don't think there's a point to it, but I hope you thought it was interesting. Thank you for watching, and until next time, read Jane Eyre or Villette and continue to be lovely.